This is Bitnar Talks, the engineer takes on construction. Episode 34. Hi, I'm Piotr Bitnar. Each day I help my clients plan and design building projects through Bitnar Limited, a consulting chartered structural engineer's practice. My biggest passion and the cornerstone on which I've built my business is finding clever solutions for construction projects. I am a chartered structural engineer and a budding software developer, so you can rest assured that I will strive to talk about the best practices and the use of new technologies in the industry. And if you're embarking on a construction project or are involved in planning, designing and building the world around us, you'll find this podcast useful. Approved Document R. Physical Infrastructure and Network Connection for New Dwellings, Volume 1 and 2. Hi guys, and welcome to Bitnar Talks, your favorite podcast on all matters of architecture, engineering and construction. It's Thursday the 7th of November 2024, and I'm here back with you with the 34th episode and information on Approved Document R, Physical Infrastructure and Network Connection for New Dwellings, Volume 1 and 2. I had the great pleasure of attending Zach Waldorf Facades, as they call it, the world's premier symposium on facade design and engineering. It was organized in the old Billingsgate, a beautiful building guarding London Bridge from the city side. I have enjoyed many talks on all matters facade and the current state of the art. It is positive to see that we all think about how to make the world of building development better. Anyway, going back to the delivery of this episode, let's recap the last one first. In the last episode, I talked about the Approved Document Q, security in dwellings. To comply with security standards, doors and windows that are accessible or provide entry to a dwelling or shared area must be sufficiently robust to deter casual or opportunistic burglars. It doesn't need to be as it is in the bank's safes. Any door leading to a dwelling, shared area or garage should be a secure door set, meeting past 24 standards or specifications as put down in Appendix B of this document, unless the garage is accessible only through another secure door. Then only one door needs to be secure. The first one won't have to be. A multi-point locking system in line with past standards is required, or alternatively, a combination of a surface-mounted rim lock and a mortise lock positioned 4 to 600 millimeter apart. For doors with accessible hinges, hinge bolts must be installed, and letter plates should be at least 260 by 40 millimeters with anti-tampering features. Door frames should be mechanically fixed according to the manufacturer's specifications, and walls of lightweight construction should be reinforced with a 600 millimeter wide resilient layer for added security on both sides of the frame. Any window within 2 meters of an accessible surface must meet PAS 24 or an equivalent security standard. As with doors, window frames must be securely fixed following the manufacturer's guidelines. In this episode, I will move to the Approved Document R, Infrastructure for Electronic Communication. So without further ado, let's dive straight into this. In this episode, I'll talk about the statutory guidance contained within the Approved Document R, Physical Infrastructure and Network Connection for New Dwellings, Volume 1 and 2. The document covers the requirements of Part R and is contained within 2 volumes, one for dwellings and the other for buildings or work that goes outside of the scope of just dwellings. These are rather short documents where Volume 1 goes for 4 sections and Volume 2 for only 2, Section 0 and 1. So let's get into the nitty-gritty of this approved document, shall we? Alright guys, starting with the text of the legislation first. Part R, physical infrastructure for high-speed electronic communications networks, infrastructure for electronic communications. Gigabit-ready physical infrastructure. Requirement RA1.1. Building work must be carried out so as to ensure that each dwelling is equipped with gigabit-ready physical infrastructure that extends from a network termination point for the gigabit-capable public electronic communications networks and reaches A distribution point, or B, where the person carrying out the building work, the developer, has no right to install gigabit-ready physical infrastructure in land in which it would have to be installed if it were to reach a distribution point, as close as is reasonably practicable to a distribution point, or C, where the developer has no such right and requirement RA2 is excluded or modified by Regulation 44ZC and would be so excluded or modified even if the gigabit-ready physical infrastructure were required to reach as close as is reasonably practicable to a distribution point. Point I, as close as is reasonably practicable to a location at which a distribution point is likely to be installed within the relevant 2-year period, a likely future location, or point II, where there is no likely future location that is closer to the building than the closest distribution point already installed, an access point for gigabit-capable public electronic communications networks, or D, where the developer has no right to install gigabit-ready physical infrastructure in land beyond the building, an access point for gigabit-capable public electronic communications networks. Point 2. Where the work concerns a building containing more than one dwelling, the work must be carried out so as to ensure that the building is equipped in addition with a common access point for gigabit-capable public electronic communications networks. Point 3. In this paragraph, distribution point means a distribution point for a gigabit-capable public electronic communication network. The relevant 2-year period means for a period of 2 years beginning with the earlier of the following: A, the day on which a building notice, initial notice or public body's notice related to work to which the paragraph applies is given. B, the day on which an application for building control approval with full plans relating to building work to which this paragraph applies is given. Now, requirement RA1 and RA2 apply to the erection of a dwelling or of a building that contains one or more dwellings. Moving on to connection to gigabit-capable network. Requirement RA2. Each dwelling must in addition be provided with a connection to a gigabit-capable public electronic communications network. Now, in building physical infrastructure, high-speed ready in building physical infrastructure requirement R1.1. Building work must be carried out so as to ensure that the building is equipped with a high-speed ready in building physical infrastructure up to a network termination point for high-speed electronic communications networks. Point 2. Where the work concerns a building containing more than one dwelling, the work must be carried out so as ensure that the building is equipped in addition with a common access point for high-speed electronic communications networks. Requirement R1 applies to building work other than building work to which paragraph RA1 applies, that consists of the erection of buildings or major renovation works to buildings. Cases in which paragraph RA2 of Schedule 1 is modified or excluded. Section 44ZC or Regulation 44ZC. Point 1. The requirement in paragraph RA2 of Schedule 1 has effect subject to paragraph 2.4. Paragraph 2. Where a person carrying out building work of the kind described in the second column of paragraph RA1 of Schedule 1, the developer, A, is unable to secure the provision of connection with a gigabit-capable public electronic communications network for a cost not exceeding the cost cap, but B, is able to secure the provision of a connection with a high-speed public electronic communications network for such a cost, paragraph RA2 of Schedule 1 is to be read as requiring the provision of a connection with a high-speed public electronic communications network. Point 3. where the developer A is unable to secure the provision of connection with a high-speed public electronic communications network for a cost not exceeding the cost cap, but B is able to secure the provision of a connection with a USO standard public electronic communications network for such a cost, paragraph RA2 of Schedule 1 is to be read as requiring the provision of a connection with a USO standard public electronic communications networks. Point 4, where the developer is unable to secure the provision of a connection with an USO standard public electronic communications network for a cost not exceeding the cost cap, paragraph RA2 of Schedule 1 does not apply. Point 5, in paragraph 2 to 4, high-speed public electronic communications networks means a public electronic communication network that is a high-speed electronic communications network. USO standard public electronic communication network means a public electronic communication network that provides at least the minimum download speed for the time being specified by virtue of section 65 2BA of the Communication Act 2003 in the Universal Service Order as defined by section 151 paragraph 1 of the Act. Point 6, the developer is to be treated as being able to secure the provision of a connection mentioned in any of the paragraphs 2 to 4 for a cost not exceeding the cost cap unless A, the developer has invited at least 2 suitable providers to make before the end of the 30th day after the date of the invitation an offer to provide a connection of the kind mentioned in the paragraph in question, and B, none of those providers has before that time offered to provide a connection free of charge or at a cost not exceeding the cost cap. Point 7, the cost cap is £2,000 in respect of each dwelling. 8. In calculating the cost to the developer of securing the provision of a connection, A, there is to be included value-added tax, B, there is to be excluded I, the cost of the developer of installing gigabit-ready physical infrastructure in accordance with paragraph RA1 of Schedule 1, II, administrative costs of the developer, and III, the cost to and end user, as defined by section 151 paragraph 1 of the Communications Act 2003, of the provision of a public electronic communication service. Point 9, in paragraph 6, point A, suitable provider means the provider of a public electronic communications network whom the developer reasonably considers to be likely to be able to provide the connection referred to. Alright guys, are you still here? It seems like an awful lot to untangle, but in essence it is rather simple. The Volume 1 dwelling gives us a simple interpretation. It first treats on the requirement RA1 gigabit-ready physical infrastructure, that is 125 megabytes per second infrastructure, or otherwise 1 gigabit or 1000 megabits. Requirement RA2 deals with connections to the gigabit-capable network and then goes on to tell us about the particulars of connection to public electronic communication network, so-called connectivity plan. It tells us when the requirements can be relaxed or excluded and how and what information to provide with our building control application. We are also reminded that Volume 2 deals with the in-building infrastructure apart from RA1 and RA2 expectations. So starting with Section 1 and the requirement RA1. The Secretary of State is happy with the either wired or fixed wireless installation as long as it is capable of delivering the capacity of a gigabit to each and every dwelling. Each dwelling should have its termination point sprouting from the access point, and the installation should go as far as possible to the network distribution point, the point at which the network operator's spine or core network ends. The distribution point may be in the form of a cabinet, box-mounted, or on a wall or on a telegraph pole, and it may be outside the development site. This requirement applies to the creation of new dwellings, so non-residential and existing buildings undergoing major renovation works do not fall under the consideration of this requirement. Neither do material changes of use. Rooms for residential purposes like hotels, boarding houses, patient accommodations, and so on. MOD buildings, Schedule 2 buildings, or remote buildings where it is either too expensive to connect to or not feasible to even deliver the basic infrastructure of a USO standard public electronic communications network. Naturally, we will need to provide evidence why we think it will be too expensive or why is the development too remote. The document guides us to Appendix B form, with all particular information expectations to be attached to the application. This requirement requires us to install a gigabit-ready physical infrastructure from the network termination point to the network distribution point, if possible. In the gist, the connection should be indwelling to the common access point and the common access point to the network distribution point, or as close to it as possible. The document shows some diagrams to illustrate different circumstances, so I encourage you to have a look in them and to engage the network operator as soon as possible. It may transpire that there is no network distribution point, no plans for the next 2 years to install one nearby, so the only reasonable thing to do will be to provide installation up to building access point. We are also sent to Streetworks UK guidelines on the positioning and color coding of underground utilities apparatus, Volume 1, Issue 9, for further information. The building control will need to be informed about the particulars of the connection. Plan layout showing ducting and specification is a convenient way of showing such. Full fiber, fixed wireless or cable are all fine as long as they can provide sufficient bandwidth. The provided ducting and perforation of the building fabric should be secured in terms of air, leakage and moisture penetration. Each connection with separate flats should be gigabit capable and in line with requirement B. Fire stop all compartment penetrations and don't use flammable ducting externally on relevant buildings. For that, see Regulation 7. The infrastructure should be well protected from damage in general. We should also mind the placement of the termination point within the dwellings. For this reason, the document sends us the NHBC Foundation NF67, the Connected Home Designing and Building Technology into Today's New Homes guidance. Now we are ready with the infrastructure. Let's move on to connection to a gigabit capable network, and these provisions are contained within section 2 of this document. It is all about connection the service provided, as the service provider should do the rest. The developer with the network operator should make the connections for each new dwelling, but not if the cost of such connection exceeds £2,000 per dwelling, or if the network operator refuses to connect. If that happens, we need to try to install the next best thing to be within the budget. The technology may be capable cable, wireless or satellite, whatever is feasible, and there should be an electrical connection with the termination point. With the cap limit, it needs to be proven that at least 2 separate network operators cannot deliver under it. We may entertain alternative connections of lesser capacity, like the high-speed electronic communications networks or USO, standard public electronic communication network. In any case, infrastructure should be sufficient for the gigabit connection, even if such network is not available at the time of the build. The £2,000 cap is the developer cost, not including any additional contribution from the network operator, and includes VAT. And that is connection cost, not the infrastructure cost, administrative cost, and so on. So the cost that's been established between the developer and the network operator. Section 3 covers the particulars of connection to public electronic communications network, so-called connectivity plan. In the gist, let the building control know what is happening before you start, and the template of required information is given in Appendix B. There are 2 parts to be considered here. Part A deals with the location and evidence for the installation or the inability of providing such. If there are exemptions under Section 1 or 2, so either no power over others' land or no connection to the network available, or the connection is simply too expensive, we need to also complete Part B of the connectivity plan, giving particulars of those exemptions. Things like the proof from at least 2 different operators of the cost, refusal of their lack of response in 30 days, or lack of national infrastructure nearby. In any case, the development needs to be otherwise ready to be connected at the gigabit bandwidth. Now, for Volume 2, which deals with the provision of in-building physical infrastructure for high-speed electronic communications networks, it applies when RA1 requirement does not kick in. and the new building is being built or is undergoing massive refurbishment. As previously, it is all about having the infrastructure ready for the connection. Copper or fiber cable will do a bandwidth, and here the limit is of minimum 30 megabits per second. For the contrast, a standard copper telephone cable can deliver up to 70 megabits per second. The installation is also limited to the distance between the access point and the termination point in the case of flats. It will be a single access point and many termination points throughout. All the remaining connections remain in the courtesy of either the developer or the network provider. Excluded buildings are such that fall under the Volume 1 consideration, classes 2 to 7 of Schedule 2. So all small and ancillary buildings, ground floor extension, agricultural buildings and similar. MOD buildings, listed monuments or in conservation area if the installation will be harmful to the appearance. In remote areas or where the cost of implementation is too large. The connection is simple, just add the access point and termination point and connect them. That's it. We are also referred to PAS 2016, Next Generation Access for New Build Homes Guide, and NHBC Foundation's The Connected Home Guide for further information and best practices. So this is it, folks. The approved document are Volume 1 and Volume 2. Let's sum it up section by section. Volume 1 of the document provides clear guidance on ensuring gigabit-ready infrastructure for new dwellings. Requirement RA1 specifies that each new dwelling must have physical infrastructure capable of 125 megabytes per second, that gigabit-ready, from the access point to the network distribution point, which may be outside the site. Non-residential buildings, major renovations, and buildings in remote areas or where connection costs are too high are exempt. If you wonder how 125 megabytes go into a gigabit, just do it times 8. Every bit got 8 bytes. For RA1 compliance, installation can be wired or fixed wireless, reaching up to the nearest network distribution point, which could be a cabinet, wall box or pole. If no distribution point exists or isn't planned within 2 years, then installation should at least reach the building's access point. Developers are encouraged to engage network operators early and refer to Appendix B for the required information in building control applications. The connection infrastructure must prevent air or moisture intrusions, use fire stopping where needed, and avoid flammable materials in certain higher buildings. Each unit in a multi-dwelling building should have a separate gigabit capable termination point. We are also recommended to have a look into NHBC Foundation's NF67 guidance. Section 2 requires that new dwellings be connected to a gigabit-capable network, with developer and network operator coordinating such. If connection cost exceeds 2,000 per dwelling, or network operators decline to connect, alternative connection can be considered. At least 2 operators must be consulted to show that the cost exceeds the cap before alternative options like high-speed or USO standard networks can be used. This £2,000 cap includes VAT but not administrative or infrastructure costs. Section 3 outlines the connectivity plan for building control, documenting connection intention or exemptions if applicable. Part A of that plan specifies installation evidence, with Part B addresses exemptions requiring proof from at least 2 network operators if cost or other factors prevent gigabit installation. Volume 2 applies to in-building infrastructure for high-speed electronic network, minimum 30 megabytes per second when RA1 doesn't apply megabits per second, when RA1 doesn't apply covering new builds or extensive renovations. Fiber or copper cable should run from the access point to termination point within each unit, with guidance for placement in flats and buildings with multiple dwellings. Excluded buildings include those in remote areas, historic and conservation zones where appearance is a concern, and any property covered by Volume 1. The installation simply needs an access point and termination point with the network connection provided by the developer or network provider as needed. Lastly, references are made to past 2016 guidelines and NHBC Foundation's Connected Home Guide for best practices on integrating next-gen connectivity in new homes. In the next episode, we will move to Approved Document S, Infrastructure for Charging Electric Vehicles. I hope you enjoyed this episode and that the consideration of the approved document R, Physical Infrastructure for High-Speed Electronic Communication Networks, Infrastructure for Electronic Communications, are a bit clearer for you. If you have any question, reach out to me on LinkedIn or send me an email. I'm more than happy to help you out. In Bitna, we deal with planning, designing and managing of your projects, and we are always glad to facilitate a free initial consultation to steer you in the right direction. Visit www.bitna.co.uk and reach out to us. Whether your question is if we can help you with your project or what should I do, we will be able to give you a piece of no obligatory advice. At Bitna, we help our clients design and execute their dream homes or investment projects. If your building is falling apart, we can also help investigate the reasons behind it and to provide you with an appropriate strategy, design and specifications for the repair. Thank you again for listening. Please voice up your opinions. I'm waiting for you on LinkedIn and I want to hear from you. See you next week. Bitna designs the world around you. Toodaloo!